Hey, Carissa, I'm very excited about this podcast and Excel and Elevate and the decision to move it to this platform. The opportunities that we have are really great for the future to bring in new voices, to bring in outside voices, but also voices from within VIA to have leadership conversations about what matters most. So talk to us a little bit about the why behind the what and about Excel and Elevate.
Yeah, really, when we think about our VIA values, one of our values is staff first. And when we think about staff first, there's two parts of that. One is investing in our leaders, helping our leaders feel cared for, to feel like they're being developed, that they have the help they need to do the job that God has asked them to do. And then the other part of that is as we help our leaders grow and develop, it's actually serving our staff and putting our staff first, because it's ensuring that they have healthy leadership, healthy teams, so they can thrive in ministry. And so that's where Excel and Elevate came from, was how do we help our team leaders across VIA excel in the things that they're doing well, continue to strengthen those components of their leadership, and then also elevate their leadership to new levels by getting greater insight on how they need to grow, things they need to learn, ways that they can do better for the benefit of their ministry and for the benefit of their team.
So as I mentioned earlier, Carissa, one of the things that we have done is change the platform from an email to a podcast. What are some advantages that we have, and why even change it to this podcast platform?
This platform really gives us an opportunity to bring other voices into the space, to bring in outside voices who can bring new perspectives, new insights, new knowledge, and really gives us more capacity to look at our VIA leadership values, our 6 values, and like a diamond, see all the different facets of that value, and to really understand it, comprehend it, learn new things, and apply that to our leadership in hopefully a more engaging and compelling way.
Thanks, Carissa. I'm really excited about where we're headed. This is Excel and Elevate. Here we go. Hello and welcome. This is the Excel and Elevate Leadership Podcast. Here at VIA, we're committed to the principle of what it means to be a steward leader and to apply the serve principles of leadership. We love to see you excel in your leadership responsibilities and have opportunities to elevate that leadership. With guests from around the globe, this is a place where we have leadership conversations about what matters most. Hello and welcome to Excel and Elevate Leadership Podcast. We're so excited for you to join us today for our very first episode. I am Donnie Todd, and I'm joined today by Mark Wilson and Carissa Potter. We're part of your leadership development team here at VIA. Carissa, why don't you tell us why we're here today, and where we're headed?
Yeah, absolutely, Donnie. So each podcast, we are going to focus in on one of our 6 leadership principles that we have here at VIA. And today we're going to look at steward leadership. And we're going to go deeper on the component or facet of that in terms of stewarding your team. We have a great guest with us today that's going to help us look at that at a new angle. Mark, can you go ahead and introduce our guest?
Yep, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you guys Kourtney Street. And I met Kourtney through Callie Davis, who's got connections to Family Life. And Kourtney's been working with Family Life for a long time, like 26 years. I think that's what it says. You've had various roles there. And
she crew and then Family Life part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And thanks for that. And then she currently executive coaches and chaplains for Family Life. And she most recently has been the vice president of culture and communication for Family Life. And she's passionate about personal growth, professional growth, and meets regularly with leaders to help them chart a path for growth for themselves and their organizations. And I got to see Kourtney in action as she trained leaders at the Support Raising Leaders Conference. And I was just popping in to see how our workshops were going, and I couldn't pull myself away from hers because I loved what she was teaching leaders from these organizations that Via Generosity gets to invest in. So super excited about what she has to offer here. And so I get to start with the very first question, Kourtney. And so the first question is, why is guarding or creating healthy culture an important and vital work as a leader?
Well, I was thinking before we start to give a definition of what culture is, just so we kind of are on the same page. Culture, we like to say, like the official definition I use is it's a set of underlying beliefs, values, and principles, and the way that we interact within an organization. So that's the big organization down to the individual teams that each of you lead. The one-liner we like to say is culture is the way things are done around here. So if you have somebody new that joins and they try to do something new and you're like, oh, we don't do that like that around here. Like that's what culture, that's the, nitty gritty of what culture is. So I think that what makes it so important to me and why you guard it is because without addressing culture and prioritizing it, we aren't as effective in our strategies. If any of you have heard that old saying, the first time I ever heard culture mentioned, it was a Peter Drucker quote, and it was culture eats strategy for breakfast, which basically means you could have the most pristine, incredible strategy, but if your staff or your employees are struggling or suffering, you're not going to get to the goal of whatever you purpose to do. And so I think that the guarding cultures is paramount because we are living on mission and we want to do the work that God's called us to do. And so we have to learn how to prioritize culture, which most of us are already doing and we don't even know it. So it's just some little tweaks that can make us even more effective in the ministry that we're called to.
Yep. I heard you say at our leadership workshop that we often have written things that are, this is our culture. But I thought you said in some form, the real test is what the workers say when the leaders aren't there.
Yes.
Could you say a little more? Just because you just talked about it, it's the way we do things. But
Yes.
Could you maybe unpack that just a tiny bit for the audience?
Yeah. I think for context, I worked with our brand team quite a bit at Family Life when we were doing a rebranding, which was so fun to be, at the conference at the launch of the new VIA brand. So we like to say that brand is what our constituents say about, or our customers, or, students or church members, whatever your context is. The brand is what people say about VIA. But the culture, and people will be more honest about the brand when the employees aren't in the room. The culture is what your team says about you as a leader when you're not in the room, or what your team says about the team. And so it's really important that the brand promise is what we say we're going to do as an organization, and what our cultural values are is what we say we're going to do in how we lead and how we serve and love each other. And when the brand promise and the culture promise are not aligned is when we start to see fractures in the organization. And it can be, it can be small, but it often gets really big really quickly. So that's why it's really important to make sure that what we're giving to the people we're serving is what we're doing for the people that we're serving with or we're leading.
Great. Would you happen to have like an anecdote like like maybe that you've experienced where you've seen where those things do or don't align, so that would kind of help give our listeners an idea of what we're talking about here?
Yeah. Well, I would say at Family Life, we've recently done, well, it's been a few years, but we did a rebranding, and one of our values is being a trusted friend. And so we say, we want to show up in the world wherever we're serving. If you're, on the conference team or you have a local ministry or whatever, we want people to experience us as a trusted friend. And so a lot of times now when we're having to make a decision or when we're in a moment internally and we have to do something with one of our teammates, and sometimes it's hard, we'll ask ourselves, like, is this how a trusted friend would act? Like, am I being a trusted friend? Or we'll even say to someone, are you experiencing me as a trusted friend? So I would say that's where, for us at Family Life, that's a big part of our values and our brand and our culture.
Yeah, great example. I mean, I really loved the way you showed the brand as being external, but culture as internal, and how it really is the inner workings of how we connect together. Thank you for sharing that. It's great stuff.
Yeah, and I love that congruency that you talk about. How brand and culture need to be congruent. There needs to be some alignment there with that. So, how does
Mhm.
culture help us cultivate a healthy field that creates long term fruit and growth in all the things that we have on our plates?
Yeah. Well, I would say for the purposes of this question, I just wanted to state really briefly what I think are the traits of a healthy culture in the context of a ministry. I love your organization. I'm a raving fan, and I think that it's really important to get clear on how do we measure culture, because we were joking before we started recording that a few years ago we would think culture was like a nap pod or going on a rope course trip with your team, or you get extra snacks and um, those things are fun and fluff, but those are not the core traits. If culture is the foundation of a healthy organization and team, how do we measure that? So we would say first is leaders who are growing holistically. So 360 view of your life. Like, are you taking care of yourself? Are you spending time with the Lord? How are you leading? How's your family relationships? How are your friendships? How are you doing financially? Like, having that holistic view of yourself as a leader. It's a clarity of vision, mission, and values. So, what is your team's purpose? How are you called to show up in the world? And how do you express that through your values that you can fall back on? And I love the way that you guys are using this podcast these are our 6 values, and we're making sure that we're putting them in front of the people that we care about on a regular basis. So that's a great example. Number 3 would be a feedback rich and psychologically safe environment. So we want to make sure, I think one of our challenges as an organization is that we don't want to hurt people's feelings. So a lot of times we can get in a habit of maybe passing somebody off to another team because we don't want to have those crucial conversations. And so that grows this sense of psychological unsafety, because people don't really know, what do you really think about me? Like, are you willing to tell me the great things about me, but are you also willing to step into the growth places with me? We highly value in a healthy culture curiosity and a like a lean startup model, like it's permission to fail. Like, you're going to try things, they're not going to work. Let's be curious. Let's figure out why it didn't work, and let's go for it. Let's do something else. And then I would say trust and respect, high value of trust and respect. So do you feel trusted? Do you feel respected? Again, these are the last 3 I would say excellent communication internally and practically. So like internally, from HQ down to the field within your own team, but also just practically, like how, are we listening more than we're talking? Are we asking open-ended questions? Are we not making assumptions about things? We want our employees and our teams to feel empowered. So are we leading in a way that makes our people feel empowered? And I would say last but not least, we are super passionate about decommissioning the invisible army, which the invisible army is people say that you do this, or headquarters says, it's like, if we have to say something to somebody that's hard, let's own it, or let's have the person who needs to say it own it, so that we don't have this feeling of there's this kind of invisible army behind this person saying the things that they're not brave enough to say, because those things these are things that you can you know give a deposit into the culture, and also things that pull away from a healthy culture or take extractions from a healthy culture. So I feel like that was a very long answer, Donnie, to your question. I'm sorry, but I was like getting on the
No,
same page. What is it?
man, I love that. I think it's a healthy field. I mean, like you just talked about a lot of really important elements. And one of the things that stood out to me is there's you can list these off. I mean, you can tell it's at the forefront of your mind. These are things that are important to you, and so I love that. I love how it was just easy for you to answer those things. But the invisible army is something that intrigues me. And it's not something that you see on a lot of lists. Maybe it's worded differently. So how do you go about that personally, maybe organizationally? What are some ways that you guys try to grow in that area, or follow through with that aspect of what you think is important for culture?
I think one of the things we're really pressing into, and within family life, and then within some of the other organizations that we serve, is educating people about how to have a crucial conversation, like a conversation that matters. The stakes are high, and you may be afraid to have it, or you may be afraid to be on the other side of it. But when there's high trust and you have to have those hard conversations, growth happens. My husband always says conflict, when done well, breeds intimacy. And I think that it takes a lot of courage, but it's a muscle that we can grow. I don't think most of us are not good at having crucial conversations, like from our, at a DNA level, but it is a muscle that can be grown. And if there's one skill that I think a leader could be excellent at, and it will be a tool that you will never regret developing, is the ability to sit in hard spaces with people where they know that you love them and they feel empowered to grow. And also, where as a leader, we're open to receiving feedback, because I've got gaps and blind spots, and I want my direct reports to know that they can come to me, and I'm going to model how to receive feedback and how to handle it. So I would say a practical example that has been like a foundational experience for me. When we worked in the Middle East for quite a number of years, and we had a really hard situation with a teammate, and I felt very falsely accused of something. And I went to my mentor, who's brilliant. And I, in tears, I'm telling her, this happened, and, all this stuff. And she looked at me and she said, I want you to go away and spend time with the Lord and make a list of everything you heard, and ask God where he wants you to grow and what is true, and what are the things you need to let go of and walk away from and not own. And I think that was it. It was the beginning of really it being modeled. Receive what people have to say, and then you take it to the Lord. And obviously, it takes a lot of guts, because it doesn't feel good, to get feedback. But I think as leaders, if we want to give it, we have to be willing to receive it.
Wow, that's phenomenal. That's really insightful. Thank you, Chris. I know you have a question that you've been waiting to ask.
Yeah, I think, that's a powerful list of cultural health, indicators of cultural health. And it sounds to me like those things take work. They don't just, you can't just do a quick workshop or whatever. And so, we've got these leaders, as Donnie said, we're juggling all the things. You've got demands of ministry and family and team and fundraising. And yet it's like, you got to say no to something in order to say yes to building healthy culture. So how do you navigate kind of that counterintuitive aspect of this, where when do I let go of short-term wins in ministry or, on the team, in order to fight for those long-term gains of building healthy culture?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Krista. I actually, I would say number one, we're building a culture no matter what. So culture is happening. And so it's not something we're adding to our list, although it feels like we are, but it's not. So I would say just, from the outset, you are building culture. And if you will focus on slowly improving your culture, it will make your life easier in the long run. Although I agree, it feels very counterintuitive. So if we were together and I could show you this slide that I love that has a bullseye, and it talks about, Jesus's orientation towards culture. He would focus on the 3, and then the 12, and then the 70, and then the masses. And so we can't, I think a lot of times, especially in ministry where we have donors and, ministry partners, and there's so many things. And I think we're tempted to go to the 5,000 first and then work backwards. And I think truly the counterintuitive nature of culture is we need to flip, and we need to ask ourselves, because if we'll focus on the 3 and the 12 and then the 70, we will love others into building healthy cultures. We'll love our family. We'll love our near ones. We'll love our teammates. And then everyone will they will actually be more successful in building a healthy culture. So my executive coach hat would say we have to be living out of our own personal mission, vision, and values and goals in order to do that, because there's just too much. Like, there is too much. The stakes are high, and life is busy, and there's so many more demands now than there ever has been before, with technology and communication and expectations. And we live in this social media culture, whether we're in ministry or not, whether we're on the field or we're at home at headquarters. And I think we have so many pressures that we have to slow down. And I have a practice of most days, today was not one of them because I had an early meeting, but most days I spend time with the Lord in the morning, and it involves looking at what are my goals, what are my values, what is my mission, to keep it front and center, because it's too easy to get lost in the week. And then on the weekends, I spend a little bit of extra time, in a deeper dive, and I ask myself, some consistent questions, so that I am keeping the cultures that I'm responsible for. I want to make sure that they're not getting lost in the busyness of my life, because it's just so much. And I feel, having lived on the field for a long time, the pressures or I feel like are even higher, because you've got people back home, you've got people, in proximity. So there's a lot that you're juggling.
Yeah. What you're saying kind of makes me think of, it comes kind of down to leadership identity,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing that part of your role, your function as a leader is building culture.
Yes.
That is as much of a value and a win as the number of churches you speak to or the number of studies that you lead. And if you've got that value and see that as part of your role and identity, then I think that's going to help you navigate your time orientation and seeing that as something that's strategic use of your time because you've assigned value to it.
Yeah. Can I give an example?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if I would write a book, there would be a chapter that was leaders pick up the trash. Like in the role I had before the VP role at Family Life, I ran our national staff conference, which was a 2-month event that was pretty massive. And it happens it used to happen pre-COVID. It was every other summer. And it was an amazing opportunity to make some significant changes and do some really hard and powerful work. And on the last night of the conference, it culminates with a big party with our 5,000 US staff, all the kids, special guests. It's a bash. We have a closing session, and then we usually go outside if it wasn't raining and have this over the top amazing party. And I, the leader that I came behind, who is deeply loved, he would stay after and pick up the trash. And, when you're kind of in that role at that point, you can go home. He's tired. He's been, we worked 2 years to pull off this 2-month thing. And I just did what he did, and I picked up the trash. John picked up the trash. I picked up the trash, and I stayed after until the very end and helped carry the trash cans to the, wherever their final destination was. And I think that it was one of the coolest wins ever, because I had a value that leaders pick up the trash. And on my 360s for the summer, so many people commented that I stayed and picked up the trash. And it was like, they felt loved. They didn't feel alone. They were tired. They were more tired than me. And, but I'd seen the leader before me model picking up the trash. He built a culture where the last will be first and the first will be last. And I picked up on that from him. And I don't know if I would have thought about doing that. I had small kids, I was tired. I wanted to go see my family finally, but John stayed and picked up the trash. And so I did too. And it's become like it's one of my core values as a leader. So.
Yeah, I love that you use that analogy. And I was thinking as you were talking that sometimes culture impedes performance. And so as a leader, it's your job. Like if it's a field, you have to remove the rocks and the stumps, and you've got to plow it, and you got to make it a fertile place. And so, I mean, taking out the trash is a little bit, but you're really clearing the way so that the relationships don't get in the way of the work, that they're actually accelerating the work rather than detracting from the work. And so I really liked one by example, you're actually out there doing the work, but culture, I mean, it just made a real clear thought in my head. Like the leader's job is to pull out the junk so that people can get to what's most important. I really like that. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kourtney. Yeah. What would you do? Like, when you're in an organization that is decentralized and has a variety of people and personalities, sometimes not every leader is concerned or has the same value for culture that you do. So what would you do when maybe you're in charge of your own team or your own department, maybe your own city or something like that? Like, how do you prioritize? Who do you include? How do you set the example of setting culture? And, what would you just suggest to a leader in that role when maybe some of the other leaders that are maybe up or down or equal to them, just aren't quite buying in the same way?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I have so many. We could spend like 3 podcasts talking about that question.
Yeah, we
Um,
could.
I would say if I could only answer with one thing, this is what I would say. I think COVID turned the world literally upside down. And I think for our generation and above, I'll say I'm turning 50 in March. And so, those of us my age and above, I think we grew up in the subculture of you work really, really hard. You sacrifice, you leave it all in the field. It's like put yourself in the background, just push, 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 hustle, hustle, hustle. And I think COVID, whether you were on the field or at home, it reoriented a lot of us around a different way of life that I really do think is Jesus's way, which is the slow and steady wins the race, which is we pull away sometimes when it doesn't make sense. We can't get to everybody. Watching The Chosen and seeing that scene by the pool where Jesus makes a beeline to the man he's going to heal and he walks away and there's all these other people. We are just one person who can only do so much. And I think our time with the Lord is how we get really, really clear on what are the things that you're calling me to do. And I think part of that reorientation during COVID was, we had forced time. Some of us, my husband, and some of his colleagues had more time. I worked harder than, I was working 12 to 14-hour days during COVID. So my reflection time came after. So I think you kind of had a little bit of both. But I would say that for the generation coming up behind us, and I'm watching this with my kids, my son's in his first, real job working for a major corporation that has a very healthy culture. And in the marketplace, they'll take less money because they care about the culture. They care about their way of life. They care about their pace. And in the nonprofit world, I think a lot of times, in ministry, the only ways that we kind of, are promoted is with a title and a position and power. And so I think we have to be really careful. This is like such a long answer. You're probably going to want to cut part of this, Tanya. I'm so sorry. I had 2 thoughts.
Awesome. No cuts necessary.
I think in the nonprofit world, we have to really check ourselves because we are rewarded with power and position. And we usually don't get a bigger paycheck. Sometimes we have a bigger budget depending on what our responsibilities are. But I think to your earlier point, we have to check our hearts before the Lord, what our motivation is, because we can grind because it makes us feel better and we feel like we're a better leader. But I don't think that's what Jesus is asking us to do. I think he's asking us to take that ancient path that doesn't always make sense. It is the counterintuitive upside down kingdom. But I think, that really is what a healthy culture is. But it takes faith and it takes staying in the present with still a view of what we're aiming for. But I love what you said, Mark. You're the first one. I feel like our first conversation around culture, you talked a lot about the soil. And I've been thinking a lot about, what is that good soil and sometimes we need to have a soil test. We need to take a sample and take it to somebody we trust and have them give feedback on what the soil's like, because then we can go back and make the changes we need to make. But I think COVID has turned it upside down. And that was in my opinion, one of the gifts of such a hard, tragic thing.
Yeah. Thanks. And I heard you saying in there, like the takeaway was that, I'm going to use an overused word, but there is a boundary around what I have priority over and what I am responsible for and to. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, to go to the question, there are leaders and people outside of that I don't have control over. And so I need to lean in, it's like the top of your chart, which is a growing leader that's 360.
Yes.
You lean in there and then set priorities about what I can invest in, and then when there are opportunities, you lean in, but maybe you didn't say this specifically, but maybe implicitly, I don't overly concern myself with people outside of those things. I do the best I can. But is that a fair summary?
It is, but I would say that's the battle. I mean, to be vulnerable, that's the battle I've been fighting. Like that has been my COVID mandate from Jesus was you're owning things that are not yours to own. and you have to trust me. Like, and I think, I would wake up in the morning and I think about our staff on the field in really hard places in the world, and our friends. We have friends that leave each day to do ministry, and they don't know if they're going to get to see their spouse at the end of the day because they're serving in places where the stakes are so high. And it was so hard to reorient myself towards this invitation that I really do believe came from the Lord, because I love those people. And it was, I could cry talking about it, but I think God was saying, you're going to miss what I'm really asking you to do if you keep owning something that's not yours to own. And so I think that's the tension of that we really love what we do and we love the people we serve, but we cannot, there's some things that are not mine, and I have to turn them over to Jesus.
Well, and thank you for making that clarification, because even as you're talking about it, I feel like it's the cycle we get in when we start to burn out, when we continually spend time and energy on things that are not ours. And it actually creates anxiety and depression and overwork and compulsion that's not biblical, and it's ambition and it's actually owning a space that God fills, right? So I feel like that's a really valuable answer. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. And I think it's, at least in our organization, working very hard is rewarded. And it's very countercultural to not work very, very hard and just work hard. So, I mean, it's really hard to only work really hard. So,
well, thanks. I think that's a really it's a valuable and vulnerable moment to say those things, about the organization you love, and we can all nod our head that we're not all that different there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kourtney, what would you say? Because this is kind of a chicken and an egg situation, right? Effectiveness and productivity, culture, which one comes before the other? They kind of go hand in hand. What do you say to the leader who feels like, man, in order to balance all these things, I'm going to have to run myself into the ground, I'm really good at the effectiveness, productivity side. So let me just focus there, because that culture building stuff, that feels uncomfortable to me, and that's going to take more work. What do you say to the leader that's kind of wrestling with some of those thoughts?
I have a new phrase that I'm using, and it would be, or a new question. Do you want to build things that you can put on your resume, or do you want to build things that are going to be in your eulogy? And I think a leader who is building a powerful culture, those are the eulogy building leaders. Those are, and eulogy building leaders usually have phenomenal resumes because they've built up the people around them. And they, my husband says, it doesn't matter what I do. It matters what you do because of what I do. And so it's, if I'm loving and leading my team well, then that's going to stay with them forever. Just like John, I learned how to pick up the trash from John. I learned about 1,000 other things from him, and I still do. He's my first phone call when I have to make big decisions. So I think we want to build in those things that are going to be long lasting, the things that are not going to burn away when things get burned away. And I think that's what culture is. I think we've made culture this kind of nailing Jello to a tree thing that it really isn't. I think you open up the New Testament and you look at Jesus's life, and that's truly, if you have to pare it all down to the nitty gritty, it's how Jesus lived and loved and served. And if we're doing that, and we're growing and asking for feedback, we're going to be building a healthy culture, and having those crucial conversations when it's tough, because none of us are perfect, and life is really hard sometimes, and most of the time. And so to me, that's the essence of a healthy culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of goes back to where you were a little while ago in the values. Mm-hmm. What do you value as a leader? Mm-hmm. And I think about, if you achieve all your goals and hit all the numbers, but you lose your people and they burn out, or even worse, walk away from Jesus, what did those goals numbers really matter in the end?
Yeah. And I would say just a cautionary statement for Christian leaders in two areas. One is that when we aren't building a healthy culture and when we aren't leading with excellence because we're Christians, it's going to affect the people who follow us in their relationship with God. It's just, it says it in the scriptures, we're held to a higher standard. And when we hurt people, it hurts, it impacts their faith. And I would say second is, for me as a wife and a mother of 3 sons, my primary culture is the one underneath this roof, which is now scattered because I'm almost an empty nester. But I would say, the second cautionary statement is, whether you're married or single, whatever your stage of life, empty nester, whatever, your community and your near ones, it's easy to put our teams first and give our leftovers to the people that are in that near one category. And I would just say, again, if you saw my little slideshow, it would have my family picture and say, that's my first culture actually that I'm responsible for. So just, whoever fits in that picture in your life, make sure that they're getting your best first.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that it's not just parents with kids. If you're single, that also matters. You have your community and it is of equal importance. Yeah.
And I think if you're a leader of single people, it's on you to make sure that you go the extra mile to make sure your single staff are well cared for, and that you're not making assumptions about things based on their marital status or their parental status, because our single staff need to be fought for in a and prioritized in a really unique way. So thank you for exclamation point there.
Well, as a single woman, I can say yes and amen to everything you said.
Amen. Yes. Yeah, we can have another podcast about that.
Yeah, we could. There we go.
Yeah, we now have like 7 podcasts of bringing Kourtney back, in the next few years. Yeah. You've set a high bar for sure. One thing I love that you have mentioned several times is just how our intimacy with Jesus really matters in culture. And I appreciate your vulnerability, just kind of like how you work through that COVID and that fight with productivity, working hard. We want to work hard. We want to be good and faithful stewards, but also balance that with how is Jesus leading us in this? One of the things I think about is simply loving Jesus or being a kind person. Does that lead to healthy culture, or is there more to just those things as well?
Well, I think yes, and I think we have to make sure that we're thinking about how other people are experiencing us. What's it like to be on the other side of me, and making sure that we can be kind and we can love Jesus and we can work hard and we can miss everybody around us and be like a bull in a china shop. Like we just had a conversation with a leader last week who's really struggling because this leader doesn't understand what it's like to be on the other side of himself. And it's, it can hurt people. And so I think we have to make sure that we're in a place where we're asking for that feedback from people that we trust to be honest with us. Because, one of the things, I don't know if I said this, but I believe it wholeheartedly. Culture building is everyone's responsibility. It's not just for the leaders. Everyone is responsible for their contribution to culture. And sometimes, our cultures can be shaped the most by those who've come the most recent. But it is our responsibility as leaders to make sure that we know how to prioritize culture. And there's so many resources now. I mean, you guys are killing it with how you're resourcing your staff. And, we can learn from other organizations and we can learn a lot from the secular world. I mean, I think it's sad to say, but a lot of times businesses are doing a better job of modeling Christ-like culture than ministries are. And I think I'm not the first one to say it and I won't be the last. So I think we need to learn from our friends who are serving in the marketplace. What are some best practices? And a lot of times it's like a dial on a soundboard. We don't have to make that many tweaks to change the sound completely. And so I think we're living in a time where we are not lacking in the resources to learn how to do it or to learn how to change ourselves.
And that's That's a great word. We can learn. We leaders are learners, and so we need to learn about culture from other places outside of ourselves, and it's so important. So that way we can see outside of ourselves. One other thing, just because I'm so impatient and don't want to wait for another podcast to have you come in and talk about it, but you talked about feedback, and you talked about receiving feedback. But my guess, my insight from what you've shared with us today is there's some key components to receiving that feedback. One, you talked about psychological trust, and the other is trust in general. And then you talked about 360 kind of reviews. Tell me a little bit more about how you guys came about building that trust, and how important feedback is in the relationship between trust and feedback.
In my role as an executive coach and a chaplain now, I see people, and this is not just, I meet with people from Family Life and I meet with people from other organizations as well. So I would say that what I've noticed is that there are people that will meet with you once and they say where they want to grow, you map out a path, and that's the last time you ever see them, because when they realize, what the path is to attain the things that they've stated they want to attain, it's pretty hard. And then you've got the people that you map out the path and they do the work and they show up and they do the work. And it's been, I was telling one of my kids the other day, I feel like I'm in this little stretch with people who are really doing the work, and it's so fun. And they'll be like, how did this happen? And I'm like, you did it. Like, you said what you wanted to do. You've set out a course. You've asked for feedback for people in your, in your daily life, and you're figuring out what needs to be done to grow. And I think that's, to me, we have to have trusted friends truly that will help us grow. I have a coach, I have a counselor that, I don't see all the time, but we call them, I'll go in for an oil change 3 or 4 sessions if I get stuck on something. I meet with a spiritual director once a month. And then I have a group of friends that I trust to tell me the truth. And so I think, that's my own value. I highly, highly value growth and trust and giving someone access to my blind spots. So I think that's, but we also, I would say, we can't work harder than other people. And, again, we can't work harder than other people, and we can't take people places we're not willing to go ourselves. So if we want to build a healthy team, we've got to model the way, but we also have to sometimes realize some people don't have that same value, and we can't force them to grow. But we also, if they're harming our team, sometimes we have to make hard decisions about that as well. So it's kind of a catch-22.
Well, thanks for expounding on that. I just didn't want to wait to hear that. So thank you for sharing that. Well, Mark and Carissa, do you guys have any last minute thoughts for us? Anything that you want to wrap us up with?
Well, I had one, and I really liked a point Kourtney made about culture is everyone's responsibility. And I love going back to Ephesians 4, where it commands, it's got that word, keep the unity. And then it goes on, it talks about people's gifting and then how the body works together, everyone doing their part, and then speaking the truth in love. Like there is no amount of lost ownership in Scripture. Like we all have a part to play in protecting. And that's where I think, we're talking about the invisible army, owning our stuff, building a safe place for others. Like just as much as I can try it, but if my team doesn't replicate it, or they don't own it, it's not very functional, is it? And so it means we got to get into stuff. But I really liked that part of, it goes to the other question of who do I have influence over, and how do I try to influence them to own their piece of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not being afraid to lead up, that our leaders need trusted friends. I think the higher you go in the org, the lonelier the seat is. And one of my passions in this season is to make sure that for the leaders that God allows me to serve, that I would be a safe place for them, for their growth, or to feel loved, because it's just, our leaders have a lot of pressure, and it's not easy right now to be a leader in a ministry or a nonprofit. So I love that, Mark.
I also wanted to ask, can we link your slide deck from SRLC from your first workshop to this so people can see kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Can I make a few tweaks before
Oh,
we
absolutely.
link big? Okay.
Or you can send
Yeah.
one that you prefer. I just know
Okay.
that we've got it in our files,
Yeah.
but if you've got one you prefer,
Yeah.
I'd love for them just to be able to scroll through and see your definitions and your
Yeah,
lists.
totally. Yeah. Yeah, I would be happy to.
Yeah, I love that at the end there, you know, you were talking about like the people that you're working with, and then it's like they're working hard and they're like, oh my gosh, it's happening. You know what I mean? And you're like, yeah, it's because you're doing the work. And I think, you know, it sometimes it can feel like a grind. You know, it's like climbing a mountain. Like you're so in it and you're just trying to move and, you know, like building psychological safety. That's not a small, easy task you can knock out in an hour. And, but then like you get that moment when your team responds a certain way or they interact a certain way or they make a comment and you're just like, oh, it happened, you know, and that's it's such a mountaintop experience where you're like, you get to see the view, you get to see why it matters. And I think, you know, just that coming back to that place that we have to do the work and it takes vulnerability to see our blind spots and to become self-aware and to get honest about the culture of our teams, how our teams perceive it, not how we perceive it, because that's sometimes different. But Jesus is in the work. And when we surrender that and we open ourselves into that, he shows up and he carries that weight. His burden is light. And it is good, the good and faithful work of the servant to care for the flock, and to care for the people on our teams. And then to reproduce that, you know, our ministry is out there reproducing, multiplying people, and we want to multiply healthy culture in the work that we do and how we show up in that too.
Yeah. Because to your point, I think you might have said this, Carissa, it's what's long lasting.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's what's not going to fade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Kourtney, thank you so much for joining with us today. I mean, I feel like we've set the bar like super high. It's probably just going to be down. It's going to be downhill from here on out. But Mark and Carissa, thanks again so much for helping us here at VIA be better as leaders, to grow as leaders. I'm excited to work alongside you guys. And for everybody else joining us in the digital world, thank you for joining us for our first Excel and Elevate Leadership podcast. This is a place where we sit around and have leadership conversations about what matters most. We'll see you next time.